an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Vorkosigan Saga Book 2-ish, Barrayar, chapters 13, 14, and 15. In these chapters, it's the first time that we are seeing Cordelia and Aral not having a unified front, and it makes me really sad. I don't like it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jeff for commissioning this episode. Appreciate you very much, Jeff. I hope you're able to make it, but I don't think you're here yet. These chapters, guys, it made me so uncomfortable. Mommy and Daddy are fighting. I don't like it. So, we start off still on the road here. And by the road, I mean the very little trail that our poor horses are having to stagger down. And I had shared with y'all, some reluctant suspicions that I was having about, what's his name? Sai the male? And I was gratified that it seems both Cordelia and Bothari are also having those thoughts. They don't really, entertain them for too long. And they both seem almost, well, at least Cordelia, a little ashamed to think it, and she doesn't want to make it too obvious that she's suggesting that there's maybe a link to him and all of the soldiers who found them and came as close as they did. But I just really want, whenever I have a suspicion about something in a story, if I'm working with all the same information that the main character is, and I am suspicious in a way that the main character doesn't seem to be, it bothers me. So all I needed was an acknowledgement from her and from Bothari that it had occurred to them. Even if they don't think it's true, I don't need them to make a big thing out of it. But, you know what I'm saying? So, and there's also the moment where it's Cly the male, not Sai. Cly asks for the prince, and he's put him up here, and Bothari says I can carry him, think you better give Milady a lift, she's about out. And I couldn't tell if this is Bothari being no, you're not going to get the crown prince guy who might have betrayed us, or if it was just a pure practicality sort of moment. I kind of interpreted it the other way, as him just being no, I will not be handing him over to you, but you can have her, though, if you want to be so helpful, I may be just reading into that too much. And when they tell him what they did with, setting this sort of fake camp by the entrance to the caves, he is just delighted and is oh, yeah, they are going to be, weeks in there, which I don't know how much of that is an exaggeration or how much of it is true, but if it's weeks for real, that is really rough. Yikes. And he's very pleased to hear that it's Cordelia's idea, and it says, you think like a soldier, milady. Cly sounded approving. Cordelia wrinkled her brow in dismay. What an appalling compliment. The last thing she wanted was to start thinking like a soldier, playing their game by their rules. And I couldn't help but giggle a little bit to this, because I get where she's coming from. And she's not wrong. But honestly, at the moment, where she's operating right now in terms of threat level and fleeing for her life, I feel like thinking like a soldier is warranted here. I don't feel like this is just relax. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So eventually they are brought to this like little sort of shanty, and Cly says this is where, you know, they're using a lot of this fast penta to question people. I couldn't risk them finding me. Don't tell these people anything you don't need to know. He doesn't even like need to say that. I think that Cordelia kind of gets the picture from how laconic these people all are, that it's better for all of them if they just don't really share too much. So she is given something to eat, brought to a cot, passes out. She would believe in safety tonight in the way Barrayaran children believed in Father Frost at Winter Fair. True, because she desperately wanted it to be. Guys, this made me laugh so hard because there's a scene in the show Community, which if you haven't watched it, it's really worth it. And it's a community college, and the dean, who's this real weirdo goofball, is trying to have like a Christmas-y celebration, but trying to keep it secular. And so he announces over the PA of the school, like, rumor has it that like secular or non-denominational Mr. Winter might be making an appearance in the student lounge. And that this is just exactly what that sounded like to me. Mr. Winter, Father Frost, you know, whatever, same. So they take off again in the morning. And it was this was sad. Cly made Cordelia, Gregor, and Bothari hide out of sight while he paid the boy off with a few coins. And Sonia, Cly's aged niece, packed him some sweet cakes to speed him on his way. Gregor peeked wistfully out the corner of one curtained window as the child vanished again. I feel so bad for this kid. This is rough. So Cly says they've got like platoons of people, and the boy knows nothing but that the old mailman was sick and needed his remount. They didn't fast penta that child, did they? Oh, yes. They dared? Cly's black-stained lips compressed in sympathy with her outrage. If he can't get hold of Gregor, Vordarian's coup is likely doomed, and he knows it. There's not much he wouldn't dare to do at this point. You can be glad fast penta has replaced torture, huh? And I felt like a punch, because what he's saying is they would have tortured him for sure, if that's the way things still were. And while fast penta is terrifying to me, the idea that you just have to tell the truth, I would certainly rather that than torture. I absolutely would, you know. I say it all the time, you guys, that nobody would need to torture me. They'd just need to show me the tools, and I would tell them absolutely everything they needed to know. And I was very gratified on the most recent House of the Dragon episode. That is a scene that we get to see, is a guy, like, all he has to do is look at the tools, and then he's immediately like, I'll tell you everything. And I was like, oh, good. Representation for cowards like me. I like it. So he's like, you guys, I have to stay on my regular schedule. And I thought what he meant was I have to do this so that it doesn't raise suspicions. But he says that the general won't be able to get in contact with me if I am not where I usually am at whatever point. And I was like, oh yeah, because I'm out here like thinking they can text and stuff. And not only is that not technology that we have seen here, but the whole dropping all of their comm stuff was done at the beginning of this. So they don't have contact like that. And these people out in the boonies here don't have that kind of tech. So I was sort of giggling to myself at the fact that I was like not even considering that aspect of things. So he says, stay out of sight as much as you can. Cordelia found Cly's last advice all too easy to follow. She spent most of the next 4 days in her cot bed. The dull silence of hours went by in a fog, a relapse into the frightening fatigue she'd experienced after the placental transfer operation and its near-lethal complications. Conversation provided no diversion. The hill folk were as laconic as Bothari. And I just really felt for her after all of this and barely having recovered and then being put through something. This is not just physically demanding. The anxiety and paranoia, you know, I think that a lot of us have experienced a sort of like almost like a PTSD effect after COVID. And a lot of the stuff that happened with like Trump's election, we have all experienced a shift in our brains due to things happening that we had kind of thought would never happen the way they did, that we thought we as people are better than this, that we as humanity will band together to be sure to stamp this, like, you know, this disease out. Take that to mean Trump or COVID as you care to. But I know that all of us have experienced a sort of change fundamentally in our stress levels, in what we can tolerate in terms of anxiety, and the sort of like endless barrage of bad news and feeling like under siege, like there's no escaping from that. And that is all in a very generalized sense and not a threat to our personal safety necessarily the way that this is. And so what I think is like, I try and take the exhaustion of my current mindset and think, what if all of the things that happened in the last like 6 years happened in the span of 3 days? You know, that all of this stuff happened to people that I knew personally and very suddenly back to back. And I was thrust into this situation after undergoing like a really traumatic operation as well. That is a lot. It's like, it's no surprise that she's ready to drop. And she asks for a bath, and it says, after the first one, Cordelia did not ask again. The old couple worked all afternoon to haul and heat enough water for herself and Gregor. Their simple meals were nearly as much labor. No pull tab to heat contents up here. Technology, a woman's best friend, unless the technology appeared in the form of a nerve disruptor. Pull tab to heat contents sounds fantastic. Don't even have to pull tab, empty into container, and microwave. You could just heat it right in the container and then eat it. Amazing. Yes, please. And this is something I think about all the time, you guys. Do you ever do this when you're like just doing a random task with a appliance, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, this has only been invented somewhat recently. What was it like before they had vacuums? How much of a complete ball breaker it would be. So this, and the bath hauling, I think about like hot bath water and what an exhausting proposition that sounded like all the time, unless you had maybe a fireplace in your room where the tub was that you could hang a pot over, but a lot of bedrooms didn't have the kind of setup to do that. So shit would have to be hauled all the way from like the kitchens up the stairs. Oh my God. Yeah, I get it. Not really worth it after the first time. So she's sort of like losing track of time, you know, the way that things happen when you're sick and exhausted and you're not on any particular routine. And oh yes, very strange, Sonia added. They took Carla Hyssopy. That hardly makes sense. And Hyssopy is the woman who was taking care of Bothari's daughter. And there's a moment where Cordelia asks, did they take the baby too? And this lady's like, she didn't, a baby? Like, whose baby would it be? And she looks over at Bothari, who's got this expression like, don't say anything. And she just says, well, maybe he'll know more when Cly comes back. And we don't really hear anything about that. And I just felt so much for Bothari hearing this, like, really devastating news being shared in such an offhanded way because this person doesn't know what this means to him personally. And there's something about that kind of a blow coming from somebody who's just trying to make conversation that's very blindsiding. So finally, 7 days later, Cly comes back, and he has Esterhazy with him, the guy who was like the horse friend, the horse boy. Since Vordarian has greatly widened his search area, Count and Lord Vorkosigan have decided that the mountains are still the best place to hide Gregor. As the search radius grows, enemy forces will spread thinner and thinner. Locally, Vordarian's forces are still hunting up and down the caves, Cly put in. There's about 200 men still up there, but as soon as they finish finding each other, I expect they'll pull out. I hear they've given up on finding you in there, milady. Tomorrow, sire, Armsman Esterhazy will take you to a new place a lot like this one. You'll have a new name for a while, for pretend, and Armsman Esterhazy will pretend he's your da. Think you can do that? Will Lady Vorkosigan pretend she's my ma? We're going to take Lady Vorkosigan back to Lord Vorkosigan at Tannery Base Shuttleport. And it's clear Gregor is like, oh no, she's like, because the only person that he had really felt that safe with to begin with was Drew, and then she gets taken away. It's clear he does not feel safe around men the way he does with women. He's just not, and I don't think that's, I think that's probably a good instinct on his part in a lot of ways from what we have seen of the types of men that surround him. So there's this moment where Cordelia is talking to Esterhazy and trying to really be like, can you please just be careful with him? And he's like, yo, he's my emperor, of course. And she's like, no, he's a little boy. And then he tells her, my little boy is 4. And she's, okay. Yeah, then you get it. And she asks thoughtfully, well, about your family, have you heard anything about what's going on with them? And he says, not yet. And she promises to do what she can, which, genuinely do not know what that even is, you know? But, Major, Sonia passed on a rumor that Vordarian's troops took Mistress Hyssopy. Bothari had hired her to foster his baby girl. Do you know if they took Elena the baby, too? 'Twas the other way around, as I have it. They went for the baby. Carla Hyssopy raised hell, so they took her, too, even though she wasn't on the list. Do you know where? Somewhere in Vorbal Sultana. Your husband's intelligence will know more by now. Have you told the sergeant? His brother Armsman told him last night. And, yeah, that's good for you, Hyssopy. Like, I don't love, of course, that she's been abducted as well. Maybe that could have been avoided. But also maybe the baby would have, like, done very poorly if she weren't also kidnapped and they're having her look after the baby. So that might bode well for Elena's survival. We'll see. So they continue on the road, and there is a stop where they're trading maple sugar for some supplies. You guys, this book really is making me want, like, waffles. You know, the constant mentions of maple syrup. That's good shit. It's just, I love me some waffles. Upon returning to his light flyer, they found that a battered ground truck had pulled up and parked behind it. And there's all kinds of stuff in the back of this. They have to climb in and sort of bed down for a little while. They'll pick you up at kilometer marker 96. When? Don't know. The man returned to his truck and drove off, and I was just like, I guess if that's all the info you got, that's all you can do. But it did feel a little bit cold-blooded. And Bothari is checking in with her and seeing, like, are you okay? And she says, better than I expected. Good to see you two. She finds out that she's being picked up by Drew and Crew. I wanted to say Crew, but it's Drew and Ku. And she's looking at them, and there is a frostiness between the two of them. They are civil, but there's a real sense to me that Kudelka apologized to. This is the vibe I'm getting, is he apologized without really understanding what he was apologizing for, which is so often the way with dudes, that there's this thing, and I don't necessarily think that this is at play here, but I'm going to mention it. You know how the boomer joke of "I hate my wife" was such a thing for a while? There was, in tandem with that, a joke about how if you're a guy living with a woman, you have to learn to apologize for nothing, because women just be crazy and get mad at you for things that aren't real. And so you have to learn how to just take that L and apologize even when you haven't done anything, because otherwise they'll never be happy. And it's so insulting on so many levels. The idea that women just get angry over nothing, that we're imagining stuff, and that you have to pacify us like we're children with a "yes, dear," even though we have very real and valid grievances and have for millennia. But yeah, sure, whatever. And I can't help but feel that the spirit with which Ku maybe apologized was not one of, "I understand the gravity of the insult that I dealt you. I understand how heartbreaking this might have been to hear. I understand that this might have even been humiliating to realize." It feels for me like he apologized with no grasp. And so, even though he may feel that's the end of the matter, it didn't actually change the way that she felt about any of it, and has just strained things between the two of them. This is all complete guesswork, but, from the way that Ku left the little, both Cordelia and Aral laughing at him, it didn't feel as if he understood what they were laughing at. So I can't imagine that he would apologize adequately if he doesn't really get what was the problem to begin with. So she talks to Kudelka about the saboteur, and he was also the same guy who shared the info about the route that they were going to be taking that one time when pot shots were taken at Aral and hit Kudelka. Let's see. Has Ilian reported in yet? Not yet. Admiral Vorkosigan hopes he may be hiding in the capital if he wasn't killed in the first fighting. And she starts to say Gregor's all right, and Kudelka stops her and is like, "None of us are supposed to know anything about Gregor. Don't brief us." And she's like, "Oh, right, yeah, of course. You can't know any of this." How is Aral? He's well. He ordered me to bring you up to date on the strategic situation and any answers that you had. And, of course, she immediately asks, "Where's our baby?" "We've not heard anything bad." What does that mean? It means we heard nothing. No news may be good news. While it's true Vordarian holds the capital, and he's publicizing names of hostages related to anyone in our command structure, there's been no mention of your child. And he says of your child. It's like he clearly was not really sure what to say there. So the overall situation isn't as bad as we feared at first. Vordarian holds Vorbar Sultana, his own district and its military bases, and he's put troops in Vorkosigan's district, but he only has about 5 district counts who are his committed allies. About 30 of the other counts were caught in the capital, and we can't tell their real allegiance while Vordarian holds guns to their heads. Most of the 23 remaining districts have reiterated their oaths to my Lord Regent, though a couple are waffling, who have relatives in the capital or who are in dicey strategic positions at a potential battlefield. I just already, again, I want waffles, first of all, but secondly, I'm really gratified that there are fewer allies than expected. I thought this was going to come across as a much more hopeless situation. And there's still plenty of work ahead, but they're coming in with a better position than I was thinking they would. So he then asks, Cordelia asks Ku about the Space Forces, and he says, yeah, over half their supplies come from the shuttle ports in Vordarian's district. For the moment, they're still holding out for a clear result rather than moving in to create one, but they've refused to openly endorse Vordarian. It's a balance, and whoever can tip it their way first will start a landslide. Admiral Vorkosigan seems awfully confident. Cordelia was not sure from the lieutenant's tone if he altogether shared that confidence. But then he has to, for morale. Yeah, that was what I was thinking, was like, he may need to do that, you know? And Cordelia also inquires about Corrine and whether or not she's been harmed. And we see her later, and there's a whole conversation about that. And I couldn't help but like, we'll get there. You know what? I'm getting ahead of myself here. So eventually they get there. She sees Aral. He is so relieved to see her and like immediately dismisses the people who he's talking to, one of whom is mid-sentence. And there was a vibe right out of the gate with him and the way he's behaving in the scene that made me ready and prepared for the vibe I get off him later, because it's clear Aral is extremely laser focused on this situation, and he is looking at big picture as much as he can, which is his job. And I'm not faulting him for any of this. I just want to be clear when I say like the vibe here. I'm not saying that he's being a shit. I'm saying that he is being distant enough, and distant isn't even the right word, because he's not actually being distant in his attitude toward Cordelia. It's just the sense of him seeing her as like, okay, now you're here and I've got you. And that was the main thing that I was really concerned about. And so now I can sort of put you out of my mind as a factor, because that's taken care of. Instead of really involving Cordelia in much of the conversation or taking her concerns later seriously. And it's tough because I really get his position in this. And the explanation that he gives to Cordelia, I couldn't help but feel was pretty well thought out. And I don't blame either of them for the way that they are approaching the situation. But as somebody who has difficulty with caring about children in stories a lot of the time, somebody who doesn't have or want children of my own, and somebody who is a very much like a fetus isn't a person, you know, I really can't help but like sort of slide in behind Aral a little bit more than Cordelia. And I say this with the full acknowledgement that my position isn't the correct one. It's just the arrangement of all of the biases and values that I hold as Natasha. That's what it adds up to, is me kind of feeling like, if I'm being honest about my priorities, I would probably align with Aral. But I can also understand how differently I might feel about this if a few things in my life had gone in a complete new direction compared to where they did. So, and that's actually like my favorite kind of conflict. You know, whenever somebody is able to write an argument or what's the word I want? Conundrum, in which both sides are able to make very coherent, valid arguments, I love that shit because that sort of turns things into a little bit of a thought exercise. And it's nice to be able to engage in a thought exercise without it being about like real stuff that affects people. So there's a staffer and he interrupts their sort of reunion. Aral is just like, look, you need to get her checked out. You guys, there's a conversation with the doctor later we're going to get to in a second, but I swear to God, I laughed so hard. First, Aral sees that one of the soldiers has like a band around his arm, a wide piece of white cloth, and a narrower strip of brown. And he's like, well, we couldn't tell who we were shooting at up close. Vordarian's people are wearing red and yellow, so you know, we're supposed to have brown and silver for Vorkosigan. And Aral says, okay, yeah, no. Take that off, burn it. We are the legit ones. We are the ones representing the palace, the emperor. We are not taking my colors on. That's only going to feed into like the narrative that they're trying to push about how it's me doing the coup. It's me that kidnapped the prince. No. And I didn't think of it that way in terms of the overall optics, but I fully agree. I think it may result in some issues, but they are going to have to figure those out. And it probably won't just be issues on their side, probably on Vordarian's too. And so hopefully Vordarian will be the one to change the uniforms. And if he has to do that, what will that say to people? You know? Cordelia, who had sort of hoped that her and Aral might have a moment alone, has to shake her head at the fact that he's already being like carried off to deal with something else. And she heads down to the underground, like sort of series of bunkers where everybody is staying. She insists on a bath first. Almost as good, she found a half dozen new outfits in her correct size, betraying Drew's palace-trained good taste. And I did find that to be, you guys know that I can be very materialistic. And it just warmed my heart to have a little something comforting like nice clothes in the midst of all of this after what she has been put through. So then we have her going to see the doctor. And he asks, and what is your present complaint? I don't like Barrayar. I want to go home. My father-in-law wants to murder my baby. Half my friends are running for their lives. I can't get 10 minutes alone with my husband, whom you people are consuming before my eyes. My feet hurt. My head hurts. My soul hurts. It was all too complicated. Fatigue, Cordelia managed at last. Ah! He brightened and entered this factoid on his report panel. Postpartum fatigue. This is normal. He looked up and regarded her earnestly. Have you considered starting an exercise program, Lady Vorkosigan? You guys, I don't necessarily think that you could only have written this scene if you were a woman, but I really think it's unlikely as a man that you would write it this way. Look, there is just such a well-documented bias against women when it comes to diagnosis in medicine and taking our pain and complaints seriously. And the suggestion immediately being an exercise program. It's not mentioned like it's weight loss. I'll say that because she's lost a bunch of weight from her illness and everything she's mentioned already. So that's not the way that it's framed. It's not weight loss specific, but it's still the same sort of tone and intent, which is to like suggest that you do something to clean up your act when they don't really know anything about you, actually. I just felt this in my soul. And I love that it fucking ends on that note, that chapter. Vicky says, the scene with the doctor had me giggling out loud walking down the street listening to the audiobook the first time I read this book. Women's troubles? No. Mostly my troubles have been with men. I forgot about that line. Thank you, Vicky. I was so busy pointing out the other one. But that is also a really good one. But yeah, this woman has had nothing but an exercise routine, sir. Please just ask her some questions about what she has recently gone through. Anything. But he does not. He just, she comes in, he gives her a look-see. She says, I had this operation, which she didn't even know what it meant. So she has to explain like a C-section birth, but it's not even, not quite, but, and she has told him, and I understand that we're living in this universe where the overall strain from a surgery like that wouldn't last as long because there are tools to heal a lot faster and sooner than in the real world. But if she has just told him how recently she gave birth and he's already asking about this exercise regimen after fleeing for her life, that's not a good doctor. That's not great. That's all I'm saying. So Cordelia asks Aral, who are Vordarian's men? Like, I feel like they're all coming out of the woodwork. And he says, for the most part, anyone who was caught with an officer up along his chain of command who elected Vordarian's side and who hasn't worked up the nerve or the wit to either frag the officer or desert his unit and report in elsewhere. And obedience and unit cohesion are deeply inculcated in these men. When the going gets rough, stick to your unit is literally drilled into them. So the unfortunate fact that their officer is leading them into treason makes clinging to their squad brothers even more natural. Besides, it's only treason if Vordarian loses. And that was really fascinating to me. The concept of how it's not about like the overall message that's being sent by who this man is siding with. It's about the fact that he is in charge of your people, and these are your people. And, when you think about the way things would shake out if you were with your family and they were being, like, handled by a particular person, you're probably not going to bail and leave them to handle that. And he is very confident that as long as he is alive and Gregor is alive, that Vordarian can't win. But he does say, like, he's throwing everything at the book. Everything. I think I was trying to say he was trying to throw the book at me, but that's not what I'm saying, because that's when you're getting booked into jail. It's, he's throwing everything but the kitchen sink at me, I think was what I was going for. Because Vordarian is making up all these different crimes. The most serious is that Vorkosigan made off with Gregor. He wants the Imperium for himself. It's kind of funny to me because, like, why would he need to do this? You know what I mean? For me, this feels like a really, really weak line, because if it's just looked at on the surface level, that there's this very powerful man with direct access to the prince, and he made off with the prince. For what reason? He's already the regent. What does he need to kidnap the prince for? If the prince turned up dead, that, yes, maybe. But this feels like a very weak story. And I'm just curious how many people are swallowing this. So she says, like, why aren't you going to show people that you have Gregor at this point? And he says, I want to see how many of his people I can get to come back to my side. He is about to say desert to me, and he's like, that's not it. I just come over. I don't wish to inaugurate my second year of office with 4,000 military executions. And I was like, oh yeah, that does feel pretty grim, huh? all below a certain rank can be given a blanket pardon on the grounds that they were oath bound to follow their officers, but I want to save as many of the senior men as I can. 5 district counts and Vordarian are doomed now, no hope for them. Damn him for starting this. Yeah, I'm very curious about those counts as well. I don't know how much of that we're ever going to find out about. Like, I don't need to necessarily know about it. I am just curious about the overall tone of the talks between those counts and Vordarian, how much he fed them that he was going to have, because like the whole insistence about what's going on right now is that Vordarian wasn't given the time he expected to set up. So if he had been overlooked for long enough that he was really able to carry it all out to plan, he would be in a much stronger position than he is. But because of the investigation, he had to show his hand. And how many counts are pissed that they like threw in with him only for it to get blown up a little too early to really work? Because it seems like a bad return on investment there. Cordelia is wondering whether anybody has located Kanzian. And it was a strange moment because this author has been pretty good about like establishing a character and what they do before a conversation is had about them. And Kanzian is dropped in here in a way that I at first thought, am I supposed to know who that is? And like apparently not, because the author explains it a sentence later. But for a moment I was like, wait, who? And for all I know, you guys are going to tell me Kanzian was mentioned in the previous book. I don't remember them at all. It apparently didn't make enough of an impression. The Admiral Kanzian, the admired Admiral Kanzian, how's that for alliteration, was one of the 2 men in the Barrayaran High Command whom Vorkosigan regarded as his superiors in strategy. Kanzian was an advanced space operations specialist. The space-based forces he had great faith in. The space-based forces had great faith in him. So, yeah, this person would be a really great help right now. But then it's mentioned Vordarian doesn't have him either. He's vanished, which is interesting. I really want to know about that, please. What is Kanzian up to? There's a moment where Aral says something about running away. And he says it in a way that's like, we don't want people to think this. And meanwhile, she's just like, running away sounds really good, actually. That sounds awesome. It's a really telling moment, and it's followed by her having a thought that has apparently struck a lot of people because it's highlighted by like 200 others on the Kindle. You should have fallen in love with a happy man if you wanted happiness, but no, you had to fall for the breathtaking beauty of pain. Can this writer just stop knocking me on my ass? Like, ma'am, it's just rude at this point to keep being quotable like this. It's just, how many am I going to end up with by the end of this? There's so many beautiful, concise turns of phrase that it's almost like I need to stop and let myself process the full meaning of a sentence after, because she has done something throughout this book, and I don't know if this is a result of like a first draft being that good, or if she wrote it in a much more convoluted way first, and then when she went back and edited, she really tightened it up. But what some of her offhand sentences sound like are when I try and write a tweet and it turns out to be way too many characters. And so I have to figure out a whole new way to say what I was going to say and shrink it down to be manageable. And in the end, when you're writing a joke especially, that editing process always makes the joke better than it was going to be. by pulling it together into very precise wording so that the timing changes and you get to the point immediately, it's always funnier because it's so much more immediate. And that is what a lot of the sentences in this book do for me. They are like really carefully, painstakingly worded tweets. And I mean that in a good way, even though it doesn't really sound like a good thing when I say it like that. So the Kareen question comes up here, and, you know, he's talking about, like, I'll sacrifice hostages if I have to. And he says, like, Kareen understands she's Vor. And Cordelia says, the surest proof I am not Vor. I don't understand any of this stylized madness. I think you should all be in therapy. And I couldn't help but, like, giggle at this because after what she went through, and fucking immediately, I was so glad that he is the one who did this. He says, do you think Beta Colony could be persuaded to send us a battle of psychiatrists? The one you had that last argument, perhaps? She's like, you need therapy. And he's like, oh yeah, your therapists are really good at their jobs. Super reliable. Very good. And even though probably she's right in her general sentiment, she did deserve that a little bit. She did. It's difficult for me not to feel a bit of a way whenever she makes these sorts of comments, even in her head, because I didn't get to know anybody on Beta that well. And so it always feels a little bit like just somebody whose inherent bias is always going to be toward their own home country, home people, whatever you want to call it. And even though what people are willing to do in this culture can be seen as reprehensible, it's also something that has like been so true up until even very recently. And it's not true quite the same way anymore, but the principles are the same, even if the way it's carried out is different. So anyway, this, the conversation that they're having here, eventually comes down to him figuring out how to like keep his men from bolting to their loved ones. And what Old Earth General said that the moral is, to the physical as the morale is to the physical as 3-1. Napoleon, that was it. Too bad he didn't follow his own advice. We each have access to enough weapons to lay Barrayar waste. Raw power is really not the issue. You know, I don't think I would care to be on Vordarian's side. Oh, there are still a few ways he could win. My death is entailed in all of them. And this dude continues on, and I was like, yeah, come on now. Without me as its focus, the only region anointed by the late Izar, what's to choose? Vordarian's claim is then as good as anyone's. If he killed me and got possession of Gregor, or vice versa, he could conceivably consolidate from there, till the next coup and the train of revolts and vengeance killings rebounding into the indefinite future. That's my worst nightmare. That this war won't stop if we lose, till another Dorka Vorbara the Just arises to put an end to another bloody century. And the Just is like capitalized and bloody century is capitalized. Frankly, I don't see a man of that caliber among my generation. Check your mirror, thought Cordelia somberly. Yeah, this is really fascinating to me, because the idea of falling for somebody who is so, not just high profile, but also like actually talented, because there are plenty of people who become high profile without the talent. That happens with shocking frequency. But falling for somebody who is really, truly special in a specific way, like Vorkosigan is with his handling of the people around him, with his, like, moral rules. He is a very unique person, very focused person with a talent that he doesn't really even seem to understand he has. And I have to think, like, when you fall for somebody like that, your life becomes less about you than them. Like, and I don't mean that in a voluntary way. I mean that in a, maybe you didn't know that's what it was going to be when you signed up for this. And I know that Cordelia didn't, because his job as regent had not been established. When she comes back and finds him and marries him, that all happens before it's ever put out that he could be regent. And I really wonder if she would have come back had the news reached her that he was to become regent or had just been sworn in or whatever. She was so eager for a calmer life, I felt, and I may be misreading her, literally and figuratively, but I know that she loves Aral. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be real, but what she had heard about the politics on Barrayar already, when you take it to this level of becoming regent and having to hold a place for a child king, that's a lot. I just don't know that she would have been able to set aside her fear about what that life was going to look like to be with Aral. Maybe she would. I don't know. But anyway, so Bothari is out here just like compulsively exercising to try and keep himself and his thoughts in check. And she's thinking about all of the people out there running stuff that are like children. And it really is really scary as you age and you look at these kids, you know. On the third day, she passed Lieutenant Kudelka in the corridor, stumping along at near run. And Ilian is here with Kansian. Oh, I forgot that he brings Kansian after this whole thing. My God. And Ilian is telling a little story, and it seems like maybe a bit bawdy, because when she comes in, he has like it says a flash of guilt. She'd rather he kept piffling on, excited about his adventures, but her arrival seemed to deflate him. If you guys didn't have this with the like women, you could have just been able to tell your jokes, you know? It could have been, or maybe they like it. Maybe they like that their women don't get to hear their special jokes because we're so delicate, you know? I don't know. Maybe that's part of the thing. So they get this report here, and it says, I've been out of communications except for Vordarian's newscast since I escaped headquarters. Though there was much to be deduced from what we did see. I commend your strategy of restraint. Good so far, but you're close to its limits. Cordelia says, did you pick up any information at all about the Imperial Military Hospital? And he says, no. But we get info pretty quickly about this. And Vorkosigan, before the ending of this, he says, I want to know just exactly how IMSEC was blindsided by Vordarian's coup. I have no wish to malign the dead, and God knows the man paid for his mistakes. But Negri's old personal system for running IMSEC, with all his little secret compartments shared only with Izar, has to be taken completely apart. Every component, every man re-examined before it's all put back together. That will be your first job as the new chief of Imperial Security, Captain Ilian. And Ilian literally goes pale and is just like, you want me to what? And he's like, yeah, go handle this. And he's just like, okay. And it's clear this dude isn't prepared. Considering the questions that I have had about Ilian, I can't help but be a little bit like, this feels like a bad idea. But I will be honest, I've kind of let go of those suspicions. I think it was really kind of a circumstantial thing. And I retract. I say retract, but if it turns out this man is no good, I'm going to want to take credit. You know what? No, I'll retract it. I'll just fully retract it. I think I was wrong. All right. So, the week wore on. The most spectacular after Kansian was the breakout of Prime Minister Vortala from Vordarian's house arrest. He arrived with several wounded liveried men and a hair-raising tale of bribery, trickery, chase, and exchange of fire. 2 lesser imperial ministers also turned up, one on foot. Morale rose with each notable addition. The base's atmosphere grew electric in anticipation of action. The question exchanged by staffers in corridors became not, who comes in, but who comes in this morning? Cordelia tried to appear cheered by it all, hugging her dread to her private mind. So, she's starting to rest up enough here and feeling like, okay, now I'm just freaking out. You know, there was a sort of nice side effect to that exhaustion, I think, which is that she didn't have time to sit around and think about things and what could be happening. And she almost is like, you know what, maybe Bothari is onto something here when Kudelka comes in. And he says, my lord requests you join him, something he wants you to see. And I was really thinking it was going to be the canister, you guys. I really thought it was going to be the uterine replicator. It's not. I was so disappointed. Like, I thought problem solved here. I should have known. I didn't expect the uterine replicator to be like the MacGuffin, which it's not fair to call it that because MacGuffin really is something that feels, come on, you know, and this is a genuine thing. But I was thinking that might be a sort of like problem to be dealt with later and that we would focus in on the military stuff here. But instead of it being us like as an audience viewing the battle, the camera is going to zoom in on one person. And I will tell you what, I have just been talking about this with some like on some other stuff that I have covered. And after I record this, I'm going to be recording the next installment of Morningstar, which is the, I think, 3rd book in the Red Rising series. And it's true of that, too. I kind of begin to go numb when there's too much action happening all at once. And it happens for a long, drawn-out period of time. And with battles, that is like a particular thing that I can find really boring to read, even if it's not objectively boring. The way I process that written down, it doesn't work well. And so for me, deciding that we're going to like, instead of doing this whole thing where we're looking at the fate of Barrayar and all of these players, we're going to zoom in specifically on what is going on with this one woman who is trying to get one thing back. And she's super important. And that for me is just so much more interesting and gripping. And it's the sort of thing that like I think about a lot whenever I'm watching something that's either a series of true events that are being dramatized, something historical, or if it's fiction even, and I sort of go off on a tangent in my head as I am wont to do. But I will look at an individual person in the castle in which all these things happened at one point. And I'd be like, what would it be like to read that person's memoirs? That one person in the midst of all of this stuff happening. And what were their days like? And how much of this touched them? And how? And what would the, you know, and this is like that same idea, but she is so personally important. She's just not some random servant or something. That whatever happens to her is guaranteed to be of like maximum drama. So you just get the perfect little combo there, and it's tasty, and I'm looking forward to it. Even though I have often said that like we need to save the child is one of my least favorite tropes. Here, it's not even a child, and so I can sort of like let myself ignore that part and have it be like, well, what about Cordelia? Somebody who has her fucking like one chance to get a I don't even want to call it a favor. You know what? I'm talking about that early too. Let's go back. So we have the reading here. Vordarian in full dress greens was seated on an ivory silk sofa, Princess Corrine at his side. And he says, I quote, and Vortala points out, he's just legally distanced himself from the words about to come off that flimsy and out on his mouth. And I didn't think about that, but saying, I quote, is a weird way to start, isn't it? Like, what does that mean? So then he goes on with his fucking accusations and whatnot. And the holo cuts back to Vordarian and the princess. Vordarian went on in such mealy terms, it took Cordelia a moment to unravel the fact that in the phrase personal protector, Vordarian was announcing an engagement of marriage. His hand closed earnestly over Corine's, though his eye contact was reserved for the holovid. Corrine lifted her hand to receive a ring without changing her calm expression in the slightest. The vid closed with solemn music. The end. You guys... So Aral is like, what did you think of her reaction? He's trying to get a gauge on like where she stands in all of this. Is she somebody that we need to like want rescue? Is that actually what's happening here? And Cordelia is like, what do I think of her what reaction? She didn't even flicker. And he's like, yeah, exactly. Like, do you think she's been drugged or being compulsed to do this? Like, what is this? And he says it's the most unreadable performance of hers that he's ever seen. Which, I don't know why, but I really feel like that's a compliment right now because I think that she does not want anything to do with this man and is doing her damnedest to just not get fucking beaten up or God knows what. And she is having to watch the dude who was going to yank her child out of her arms propose to be her personal protector and use her as this little, like, tool. I bet she was, like, not even allowed to speak. It sounds like she simply lifted her hand. It's weird. It's very weird, and I think that it seems clear from the way that she talked about Vordarian to Cordelia, which she doesn't bring up here. And I kind of didn't really understand why not. Maybe it's supposed to be just assumed that what she was told was, you know, in the days since her and Aral just share everything and she told him about that. But here, I just thought it should be brought up that in that personal conversation that they had at that party, she was very much like, as soon as I realized I didn't need him anymore, I started to distance myself. Like, it seemed obvious this was not a man that she was interested in throwing in with at the time, and that certainly all of these circumstances have changed. But as far as she knows, this dude may have her son. You know, she may not know. He's talking about like, oh, he's been kidnapped, and we know he's desperately trying to find Gregor. But he may have told her that they do have him and be using that as leverage even, you know? How would she know? And he's just lying to the populace about the fact that this kid has been abducted while he's got him stashed in a closet somewhere. But yeah, the way that Cordelia, like, this is so good, you guys. She's, first of all, like, look at everything she's gone through. Of course she's just able to sit there completely deadpan. After what she has survived, she was married to a psychopathic sadist, and she's okay. And that's something you have to get real good at if you want to survive a person like that. And she says, what does she believe? If she truly thinks her son is dead, even if she doesn't believe you killed him, all she has left to look out for is her own survival. And what does she owe you? Owe us? We've all failed her, as far as she knows. Vordarian's controlling her access to information. She may be convinced he's winning. Maybe the only revenge she thinks she'll ever get is to live long enough to spit on all your graves. But she's Vor. She should have defied him. Cordelia favored him with a glittery grin. Oh, but you never know what any Barrayaran woman thinks by what she says in front of Barrayaran men. Honesty is not exactly rewarded, you know. The staffer gave her an unsettled look. Drew smiled sourly. Vorkosigan blew out his breath. Kudelka blinked. I bet he fucking did, you idiot. I like Kudelka, don't get me wrong, but also I am being entirely fair. And the staffer being unsettled, I love it. Yeah, think about that. Just go ahead and chew on that. So, then we have Cordelia by herself, wondering about Corrine, and just realizing there are too many unknown factors. I have no idea what she knows, what she's been lied to about, you know. And she gets a call. I'm Major Surkoj. It's my job to screen everyone new reporting in. There's a man insisting to speak with you. And his name is Captain Vaughan. She flies down there. And Vaughan, who is just distraught, like, this man is so upset. He has seen some really grim stuff very recently and is just so angry. And he tells her they broke in, they took the canister. She's like, did they empty it? And he says, no, they took it with them. We had been all vigilance the first few days that everything was going down, even the first couple of weeks, and we have started to slack a little bit. And they came looking, broke in. We wouldn't tell them, and they couldn't fast pen to us because we had been, you know, drugged against it. And so they beat us up, beat him to death, like street scum, like it was nobody. All that intelligence, all that education, all that promise wasted, dropped by some mumbling moron swinging a gun butt. And this is such a weird combo of, like, because the way he's talking about the waste of this life, there's also they killed him like he was street scum, and then calls this other guy a mumbling moron. And it really felt eugenicist-y to me, which, I mean, that's pretty much what they've done in this universe. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it just felt very much like his life was worth more than another person's life that would have been fine to kill, you know? But yeah, they took the replicator and they let me go. And she's like, okay, to come and tell me. And Vorkosigan, who has walked in and heard all of this, says, I guess they're turning the pressure up too. So then we go into chapter 15. Within 2 minutes of Vorkosigan's arrival at main portal security, Captain Vaughan was flat on a float pallet and on his way to the infirmary, with the top trauma doctor on the base being paged for rendezvous. So I'm going to have to cut this short here because I am over time already. But I have kind of already talked a little bit about the main argument here between her and Aral. Suffice to say, Aral is not responding to this news in a way that satisfies or makes sense to her. And it feels very much for me like he is thinking that, and I know that this may sound really harsh, and I don't mean it to be an indictment of him so much as something understandable that happens when you have been brought up your whole life a certain way and to believe certain things. But Aral was supporting Cordelia and her maintainment of the fetus in this replicator, despite common opinion apparently being that this kid's going to be a mutant anyway. So Aral earlier said something about how I'm making sure not to go after my son because I don't want any of these men to feel like I'm telling them they can't go to their families, but I get to. Like, that's super not fair. And Aral really thinks that he's establishing a sort of equality there that they will respect. But she talks to the Count, and the Count is like evidently not the only one who is sort of thinking that this isn't a real sacrifice because that kid isn't a whole child, which honestly, even if the kid weren't going to have any sort of mutation resulting from this thing, it's not a whole kid. It is a fetus. There is truth to this, you know? So he isn't having the effect that he thinks he's having when he's telling everybody this. And this indicates that that's common opinion, that this kid is going to wind up being a mutant and therefore unworthy of being born. Why are we bothering? And the fact that everybody thinks that, and that Aral has been clearly raised to think along those same lines, I can't ignore that. I believe that he is supporting Cordelia because he knows that this is her right to attempt this, that he wants a child no matter what, and that's all. But I can't help but think he is supporting her because that is part of his principle, is to support her, even though he has his suspicions that the kid is going to be mutated, that there is going to be a big problem, and perhaps is even simply humoring her. I don't really believe that, but I will say, when you have a belief in your head that is so ingrained, no matter how much you advance later in life, there will always be that first instinctive reaction that you have to overcome by reminding yourself, no, I'm better than that. I don't think that anymore. You know, the first one is what you're taught, and the second one is who you really are. And I can't help but think that as much as he is truthful about it being dangerous for their position and everything, to even go after Miles, is what they're calling him now, I also can't help but think if he weren't as invested in Miles being given a chance, you know, like, is it possible he could be like, maybe it's for the best if we don't go after him? You know, it may not even be something that he really believes. It could just be like a voice. But in the end, the decision to like tell her that she absolutely is forbidden to go, I was really shocked that he even used that language. And I can't help but feel like she was too, like that there was a sense of that, because she speaks to him, and at one point it's like he's not connecting with her. It says she stared into those half there gray eyes, willing, see me, Aral. We have to talk about this. And that's a moment that we haven't seen with him. Mostly when she has been talking, there has been a real symbiosis between the two of them to a degree. You know, it's like they're on the same wavelength all the time. But he is so half present, and I'm not even faulting him for that. This is huge what he's dealing with. So, you know, I get that. It just, the whole way that this goes, she says, eventually, what favor have I ever asked of you, Aral? A sad smile quirked across his lips and vanished. Nothing, he whispered. I'm asking now. Now, he said after a long hesitation, is an extremely delicate time. And she's just like, yeah, it is. It is. And she doesn't respond right away. If we bring this negotiation off as I wish, we will be in a position to rescue most of the hostages in one surprise raid. I'm not asking for a big raid. No, but I'm telling you that a small raid, particularly if things went wrong, might seriously interfere. Might. Time? About 10 days. Not good enough. And she then is like, I could go. And he really reacts to that. And she asks, do you doubt my competence? And I love that she's asking it to try and be like, are you just going to say that to my face? But also personally is like, yeah, me too. And when he says, you're stronger than I, strong beyond reason, she says flattering, not convincing. I love it. Yes. There are times when somebody thinks that they're snowing you and it's so patronizing. Like, come on. And she basically tells him, like, because he says, I'm not going to risk both you and him. And she's like, you are. Basically, like, you don't let me go and it's going to be a real fucking problem. And he doesn't really seem to take that very seriously. Anyway, this the run-in with Pyotr, she's already so upset from this, but when Pyotr hears that they have the canister and is like, oh yeah, like, we're gonna give a shit about that, she actually asks him if he was in on this. I loved it. Oh my God. Because I know that she doesn't really believe it. She is just leveraging his position here to put him on the back foot and be defensive and upset. And I honestly fully support this. You know, I really do. Like, this guy has been such a shit that just deciding to sort of, like, put him in his place where it's like, I even suspect you, you know. I mean, I think that's beautiful. I thought that was lovely. Especially considering him trying to be like, oh, I'm not putting my name on that thing. She's like, oh, you don't want to be a part of this family? Then you're not. Now you're a suspect. How's that feel? You like that? You're welcome. You asked for it. I'm so over time, you guys. Oh my God. I really got to wrap. I have another show starting in like 9 minutes. Suffice to say, she decides to go for it. And she's got Drew and Bothari and eventually also Kudelka. And I was just like, yeah, we got the whole gang here. This is what I want. I can't wait to see how they react with each other. It's going to be really interesting. Also very excited for Drew to, like, start not looking at Bothari like he's a fucking bomb about to explode. He is a little, but girl, you got to play it a little bit better. I'm just saying, it's a little rude at this point. But I do like that it's never a question for Drew or Bothari whether they're going with her. They're clearly like, oh yeah, absolutely. We're on board already. We already talked about it. All right. So I am going to have to wrap. Again, so sorry that I went over. I feel like I didn't do this chapter justice, but I'll talk about it next time. But appreciate you all being here. Oh, Jeff just got here. I'm sorry, Jeff. But thank you for commissioning this, dude. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.